Welcome to Jack's Corner, where conservative values meet national headlines, and truth and reality have a seat at the table. From Louisville, Kentucky, here's your host, Jack Richardson.
Well, welcome back to another edition of Jack's Corner, where truth and reality have a seat at the table. And we are certainly not in the dog days of summer where news is sparse. We've got a blizzard of news today and over the last week, almost like the 10 inches of snow outside my window. So let's get into one of the topics that I think is one of the most important right now that people really need to be focused on. Trump gets a lot of criticism, and they think he's such a jokester when he talks about Greenland, Canada, and Panama. But if you've learned anything about Trump, you got to know that he's done his homework, and there's something much deeper there than you really realize. And the first topic I want to deal with today, and it's in an article in my Bluegrass Chronicles that was just posted. It's called, "Who is Múte Bourup Egede?" E-G-E-D-E. Now, I'm not familiar with how to do the pronunciations of, I think it's Inuit language, but it's the language that many of the inhabitants of Greenland speak. But anyway, Múte is a very interesting person, and I want to get into it. And these things you need to know about Greenland. This is a very serious situation. This is no joke. And if you don't know Múte, you're going to get to know him pretty soon, because they call him the Prime Minister of Greenland when basically all he is a small town mayor of a landmass. And I'm going to get into that in just a minute. But this fellow and how we go about this could end up causing a Cold War in the Arctic. Now, as I look at some of the things that I raise in my article, you know, this is nothing new. President Harry Truman talked about it and suggested buying it. I think it was for $100 million. And in 2019, Trump talked about it. Of course, the whole establishment back then was attacking Trump, and they tried to demean everything he said as crazy. But I'm going to show you just about how crazy as a fox this new president of ours, and thank God he's going to be, because you're going to see just how close to the edge the traitorous Biden administration, and even prior to that, the Obama administration, led this country. We are on the edge, and you need to be thankful. You need to thank God that Trump is in. But the battle is just beginning. Yes, we've got a premier position, power structure-wise, with Trump getting back into the White House. But let's get back to Greenland here just for a second. Trump talked about it in 2019, and he says that U.S. control of the island is an absolute necessity for our national security. And it is. And only uninformed idiots basically think that it's a joke. And I'm going to tell you what you need to know. And buying Greenland from Denmark is nothing unusual, because we've purchased land. I think St. Croix was purchased down in the Caribbean from Denmark at one time. Now, he also mentioned about Canada. Well, with regard to Canada, you have no idea what Trudeau did to that country in the last 9 years. Now, I know I'm lumping all this together, but I'm going to separate it out for you in just a minute. But Trudeau has now resigned, but this Marxist-loving, and that's not an ad hominem, because he, in his own words, said he admired the communist form of government in China and in Cuba. So Canada is on the verge of economic collapse. I bet you didn't know that. If it weren't for the United States and the trade deficit that we have with them, we give them billions of dollars a year. And if it weren't for the billions of dollars that we give them through the trade deficit that we incur with Canada, they'd be bankrupt. The people up there are already at the point of starvation. But see, the news media doesn't tell you about that, because they were so in love with pretty boy Trudeau, who was basically undermining and destroying freedom of speech, freedom of religion, jailing people because they didn't use the right pronouns, jailing the truckers in the trucker strike and so forth. He came even under condemnation from the European Union. But there is so much to unpack here, but Trump is absolutely right. Greenland is a national security issue for us, and Canada could be. Remember, Canada is the only other country other than the United States that spans from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific. And that's very important globally from a strategic standpoint. Now, we need to think about the importance of Canada. Now, he's mentioned about, in more of a tongue-in-cheek way, about making Canada the 51st state. I think really what's going on there is to bring the discussion into the public domain so that we start culling the facts out as to what's really going on in Canada and how important it is. It's like I said before, it's in a state of economic collapse, and this is dangerous for us. And so when he starts talking, that is, Trump starts talking about it being the 51st state, did you know that 80 to 90% of the population of Canada lives within 100 miles of the U.S. border? That's astounding. The rest of it is just a vast wasteland, but it's mineral rich. Then we've got basically the combination of Greenland and Canada together create a very strategic issue for us, and we can't take it lightly. So Trump, even again yesterday in his press conference, highlighted this. And of course, he's been being excoriated over I hate to even call them the mainstream news. They're not mainstream anymore and shouldn't be, but he's being excoriated there. But it's important for you to know just exactly what's happening. Let me develop this a little bit further. You've got China and Russia, whose favorite pastime is election interference, particularly amongst democracies. And we've seen that in our own country, but they do the same thing in other democracies like Canada and around the world, where they try to get into power those people that they think will be most favorable, rather, to their policies and what they want. And Trudeau was absolutely one of China's favorite because he loved the Chinese government. He loved the communist government of Cuba. Cuba is even in an economic collapse right now. But the liberals, the leftists, the socialists, the Marxists, the communists, they never learn. All they want is power and to rule over your lives. So we got to be careful about this, but what's so important about election interference? It's what they do and what they've done in Canada, but what they can and will do in Greenland. See, now we're beginning to thread all this together and pull all this together. We've got a country in Greenland, and I will backtrack there. It's a land mass in Greenland that has only 56,000 people in it, the size of Youngstown, Ohio. Most of you can't even locate on a map where Youngstown, Ohio is, but it's only as big as Youngstown. That is the whole land mass of Greenland, which is 20% bigger than Texas. Now we're beginning to put all this into perspective. And Greenland has rich reserves of rare earth minerals. Well, what do we use that for? Well, we use that for our phones, our cars, our batteries, so many other things. And who controls 90% of the rare earth minerals right now in the world? China. So China has been making advances towards Greenland. Greenland not only has rare earth minerals, they got huge coal deposits, oil deposits, uranium. And so this isn't about just fighting over ice. Let me phrase it this way. Greenland is no more green than the Democrat Party is democratic. But it's a lot more than just about ice. It's about all the minerals and the strategic location that Greenland is in the world. We're talking about toward the North Pole. We're talking about the sea lanes up there. And China is pretty much interested in Greenland. And why? Well, that puts them instead of 7,000 miles away from our border, only 3,000 miles away from our border. That's pretty strategic. We almost had a nuclear war with Russia when they put nuclear missiles into Cuba. And that was called the Cuban Missile Crisis, which I remember. And we came very, very close at that time. Well, we don't need to repeat that by having another island crisis, but this time in the Arctic, where either Russia or China are going to put nuclear missiles or take over all the mineral wealth of this landmass called Greenland. This is very, very important. So that's what the fight is all about. Trump sees this. Trump saw that back in 2019. Now he's bringing it to the public attention, but it hasn't been fully developed. So now it's seen as more of a joke or a pipe dream. Let's get real sober about this. It's not a pipe dream. It's going to be a major, major world issue, and you better get used to it, and you better start thinking in terms of a global political, geopolitical strategy here. That's what Trump is focused on, and that's why he's going to make such a good president, because the president that's getting ready to leave office is doing everything that he can to destroy this country by banning offshore oil drilling with over a 650 million square mile area. So this is what we voted in 2020, and they've been destroying us. And so the cavalry has come to our rescue insofar as Trump and his administration that's going to come in. But we cannot be absent-minded with regards to the significance of Greenland. Now, so who's in charge in Greenland? Well, is it Denmark? Well, to some extent it is, but now we've got this guy who I said, well, who is Múte? Well, Múte is a 37-year-old fellow who has minimal education. He went for a period of time over in University of Denmark, and I don't think he completed any degree over there, but he was more into studying cultural and social history issues. You know, that and $4 will get you a cup of coffee at Starbucks. And so what we have here is that we have a small town mayor at best of a town of around 56,000. In fact, the town he's in, Nuuk, N-U-U-T, no, wait a minute, N-U-U-K. Nuuk, Greenland, is even smaller than the 56,000 people that are in Greenland right now. But the importance of that is that we've got a fellow that is not that well educated, is not that well versed in geopolitical strategies and negotiations. And while they call him prime minister, he's basically, as I've said, just a small town mayor. Now, he's going to go up against China, and he's going to go up against Russia. And with China's Belt Road Initiative, where basically they come in and loan you a lot of money, and then you end up having what's called debt diplomacy. That is, you can't pay for your debt, so China is going to impose upon you certain restrictions and demand that you do certain things policy-wise and governmental-wise that's favorable to China. Well, the last thing we need is for Múte, who was recently elected as the PM in Greenland, to say, well, we no longer need your military bases, United States, in our so-called country, our landmass. So there again, that's another thing to be thinking about, is that we've got important military bases up there, which if the Chinese have a huge impact over how the governance of that small town goes, they could demand that we get rid of our military bases up there. So then what you have is that you have the North Atlantic and the North Pole and in the Arctic area under the control and dominance of these totalitarian regimes. Now think about it. If something happened to Canada and Greenland, then basically you have governments like Russia, China, North Korea having a skull cap over the whole top of the Northern Hemisphere. And these are the types of things, smart things, that Trump thinks about He's very strategic about this. And so I'm telling you a lot of things that you've probably never heard before, but it's something that you need to start paying attention to. And don't let some of these naysayers, don't let some of these people, these leftists in the media tell you any different. This is very important. Now, we don't leave it with just Greenland or Canada. China is basically almost controlling the Panama Canal. And I wrote another article with regards to don't expect me to give any eulogy over Jimmy Carter. Yeah, everybody's playing nice right now with regards to the recent death of Jimmy Carter, but I'm not going to eulogize him because I lived and suffered through his 4 years of a horrible, disastrous presidency. As I've said before, 21% interest rates, 10 to 12% unemployment and inflation rates. We were in a disastrous situation with Iran. They took hostages, and it took Ronald Reagan to get into office. And there's a lot of parallels between Reagan and Trump. And it took Reagan getting into office to get our hostages back. Jimmy Carter had run this country into the ground. But Jimmy Carter also gave away the Panama Canal for $1. So now we find ourselves with China over there. So China's on our southern border. Russia has some great influence with Cuba, and now China's making advances to Greenland. So where God had placed this great country between two great oceans to separate us from the diseased politics of the old world, they are now sort of circling us. And we need to wake up to this because you're not going to hear that from the news media because it doesn't serve their interest and it doesn't serve their staying into power. Now, with regard to Múte being in power in Greenland, this is child's play. For China, this would be like taking candy away from a baby. And he is not that sophisticated, and he already has these leftist leanings. So we can't allow China or Russia to have any kind of a foothold in Greenland. And like Trump said the other day, if it comes to military, yes, we have to protect our vital interests, and Greenland is in our vital interest. Just as if Canada were to be taken over or invaded by Russia or China, we would have to defend our interests there. And we're going to have to defend our interests in the Panama Canal. And why are we having to defend all these interests? It's because of the liberal leftist policies of the Democrat Party, which, again, I said it's anything but democratic, that they have imposed over the last several decades. So basically, I know I'm going long with regard to this particular subject, but we need to not only pay attention, but Greenland is better in our hands than their hands. And so that's the bottom line there. But you need to be paying attention to it. You need to be doing your own research with regards to the importance and significance of Greenland. It's something that we haven't thought about probably in any of our lifetimes. We just know that it's a big frozen island. Well, it's more than ice, and it's about to become very significant on the world stage. So keep tuned to that. Now, the next item I want to get into in this rich news environment, and Mark Levine talked about it the other day in one of his shows on the Fox News Network. And I entitled this article in my website, With What Religion Do the Terrorist Attacks Have in Common? Now, why do I bring up terrorists and so forth at this time? Well, if you've been paying attention, back on New Year's Eve, we had a terrorist attack that killed 14, maybe 15 people in New Orleans. So terrorism is still alive, and it's come to this country. And that's what we're going to be dealing with in 2025 and in the next few years because of what the Biden administration allowed to happen at our southern border. Tens of thousands of people that had criminal backgrounds and records came into our country, and we have no clue where they are. And this, folks, was all by design. This is what the left does. This is how they maintain power. They create chaos. And we will have some chaos, and I believe that we're going to have some terrorist attacks, unfortunately, because of what the Biden administration has done. But we had this horrific event down in New Orleans. And that's because this guy, even though he was American born, he was radicalized by a religion. And so that's why I entitled the article, "With What Religion Do Terrorist Attacks Have in Common?" Well, let me give you a hint. It's not Protestantism. It's not Catholicism. It's not Hinduism. It's not Buddhism. It's not Judaism. There's one hint. So now, have you figured it out yet? Well, let me give you another hint. When you fly and go into the airport, you have to go through metal detectors. You have to take off your shoes, your belt, your coats, and you have to be scanned. Now, do you have a hint as to what religion that could be that's made your life so inconvenient to even travel or even gather in big crowds like they did down in New Orleans on New Year's Eve? Well, here's the last hint for you. President George Bush called it a peaceful religion. Well, he was either lying to you or he was stupid, maybe both. And even though he's Republican and I'm Republican, I don't, curry favor with even stupid Republicans, and I probably call them out about as much as I do Democrats. If they're not in tune with the truth, don't expect to have any friend in me. But if you guessed Islam, well, then you'd be right. So that's the one singular religion in the world that has something in common with the terrorism and what we see going on in the world today, and particularly the Middle East. It's time to start connecting the dots. Every inconvenience you encounter in your travels is somehow associated with the prospects of terrorism and violence and carnage from this radicalized religion. It's an untenable one. And I'll give you a little bit of an anecdote here, personal one. Most Muslims, and I've, as an attorney, have represented many of them, and some have been friends, and most Muslims don't even know what they believe because they haven't read the Quran. And if you've read the Quran like I have, it's a very, very bad fantasy. In fact, Disney makes better fantasies than what the Quran is. Even the Quran calls Muhammad a false prophet. But most Muslims don't know that because they don't read the Quran. And if they did read the Quran, they wouldn't believe it because it's hard to believe. But I don't want to get into a theological dissection of Islam, but it is unmistakable with regard to the connection of terrorism and violence in the world with this one religion. And they have not been held accountable. And it's time that people wake up and stop being politically correct and toxically tolerant and start putting the pressure on the people who head up or who are the leaders of this religion and say enough is enough. Now, I have, in Hyde Park, London, England, years ago, had a debate with an imam and about 12 Muslims around me. And of course, I knew it was not going anywhere, but we debated between Christianity and Islam. And it was a pretty interesting exercise back then to be surrounded. And when I looked out over Hyde Park, it looked like Mecca. It's amazing what England has done to itself because multiculturalism is destroying the West. And it was a really, really bad idea, a really bad experiment. But now they're having to dig themselves out. And just recently, the police chief of London said that if Americans show up in England and they have posted things that England doesn't like on their post when over in America, you can get arrested over in England as an American because of what you may have posted. Well, so much for my trips there. And I did have a discussion with several months ago with Nigel Farage, who I hope will be the next prime minister. And we joked a little bit, but I said, well, Nigel, and I gave him my book at the time. And I said, Nigel, I've postponed any further trips to England until you all get your free speech ironed out. I think he will do that if he makes it to being prime minister. But anyway, that's just a little aside with regards to the issues that I've had with Islam. But this is a fresh topic right now and fresh on our minds because of what happened in New Orleans. And we can't discount that. And I believe that, and unfortunately, I think we're going to see more of this in the United States because of what the Biden administration did on the southern border. It's not a peaceful religion. And one more little bit about this and Islam. There's a great guy by the name, he's passed away now at a terribly young age, Nabil Qureshi, who wrote the book Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus, a devout Muslim encounter with Christianity. And it was a great book. He had impeccable, unbelievable scriptural and biblical knowledge. He gave really, really good lectures, and tears came to my eyes when I found out that he had passed away. He must have been in his 30s or early 40s when it happened. But he was a devout Muslim at one time, but he saw the truth. And so anyway, just tying the two together with regards to what happened in New Orleans and the fact that there is a source, there is a core to all this. That's what I get at in my book, America's Systemic Psychosis. You have to get to the core of what the problems are that we're facing today. If you don't, you're not going to solve the problem. A lie cannot prove itself, and a lie cannot heal a disease. So that's what we've got. We've got a disease, a worldwide disease that's causing a lot of the violence and carnage in the world today. Now, another item that I want to talk about, and I've written about, called transgenderism and the criminal power of suggestion. And I'll be quick about this. There was a writer for the New York Times called Masha Gessen, a Russian transvestite. Well, how did she get to be a commentator and writer and so forth with the New York Times? Well, that's the New York Times for you, and that's what you get with liberals. But she wrote a piece entitled, "What Democrats Are Getting Wrong About Transgender Rights." Well, here's where I hope through this podcast is to get you to think and not to buy into false narratives. Remember, she said that she ended the title with transgender rights. Well, folks, there's no such thing. Transgenderism is no such thing, and the reason why is because it's a mental disease. It's a mental malfunction. You are not born into the wrong body. And so if you listen to those types of articles and those types of statements, and all of a sudden you're on the wrong path, you're buying into a narrative. And so there is no such thing as so-called transgender rights. Don't be sucked into that. Now, do they have rights to medical treatment? Yes, anybody has rights to medical treatment to seek it out. So whether you have a mental illness or a physical illness, yes, you have a right to seek out medical help. But you don't have a right to take what's a deviance, that is less than 1% of the population, and turn it into a normative and force upon everybody else where they have to make a positive change, either in the negative or the positive, as to how they live their lives. No, if you've got this issue, transgender dysphoria, if you've got that type of issue, then go get it treated, but don't expect everybody else in the whole world to change how they live and how they think because of it. So anyway, that's I've got more on that, but look that up in the my website, Transgenderism and the Criminal Power of Suggestion, because that's an important phrase itself, the power of suggestion, because that's what's happening in our schools today with our children. Okay, I know that's a lot of intense content there. There's so much more out there, but I wanted to end with the woke of the week, which I thought was pretty amusing. And it ties us into Canada, where Trump was talking about Canada being the 51st state. And in response to Trump's threats, Ontario Premier Doug Ford, and I guarantee you this guy is as leftist and Marxist as is the former Prime Minister Trudeau. And Ford who's, like I said, Premier of Ontario, suggests that Canada should actually absorb at least 2 U.S. states. Now get this. You know something? To the president, I'll make him a counteroffer. How about if we buy Alaska and throw in Minnesota and Minneapolis at the same time? He told reporters amid the threat of looming U.S. tariffs and Trudeau's resignation announcement. Well, Mr. Ford, you can't have Canada. You can't have, well, almost don't have Canada. You can't have Alaska, and you can't have Minnesota, but you can have Minneapolis. And besides, Minneapolis isn't a state. So I don't think he knew that Minneapolis was a city and not a state. But that's the woke of the week, and he's the wokest premier of the provinces in Canada. So there you have it. Have a good week, and we'll see you next.